Today's going to be a fun Things Hidden episode. We're joined by an actor, someone who considers himself, I guess you would say, a heterodox liberal. Clifton Duncan, how you doing, sir?
I'm all right, Mr. Gornoski. How you doing?
I'm doing well. It's great having you on. I saw you recently give a great talk at the Mises University event in Auburn, Alabama. And I guess as an actor, you didn't think you'd be getting into giving lectures at economic think tanks, huh?
Oh hell no, no. As I stated repeatedly throughout those remarks to the students, that there's no indication that I thought that I would ever be there. But I think I think there's a lot of reasons for that, a lot of good reasons for that, and it seems to whatever my hangups about me being included. I mean, I'm sitting a few feet away. I'm looking at like Tom DeLorenzo. I'm like, why am I in the same room with Tom DeLorenzo? Um, but it seems to have made a huge impact. People were really responding positively to it. I'm still getting messages even more than a week later, almost 2 weeks. When was it? Last Sunday? I don't even remember now. It seems like it was ages ago, but lots of overwhelmingly positive messages. Lots of people congratulating me for standing up for the good fight. Which I just feel like I'm some a-hole with a phone and some opinions, but people really seem to be. I'm heartened that people have found so much value in what I had to say. So it turned out all right, I guess.
So where did you grow up? Just a little background on you here.
Germany, Virginia, Belgium, and Virginia. My mother was in the army. I was born in Heidelberg, Germany. We lived there till about the age of 4, till I was age 4. And then we moved to Hampton Roads, Virginia, which is Southeast Virginia, the peninsula, for those who aren't aware, or was it Tidewater is probably maybe a more familiar term to people. Then we moved to Belgium when I was about 8, and I was dragged there, literally kicking and screaming. But then by the time it was over, I didn't want to leave. And then we actually ended up going back into the same house that we lived in Virginia before we left to go to Belgium. And then I spent some time in Virginia. I went to undergrad in Richmond, Virginia, and then I kicked around in DC for like a couple of years, and I went to grad school in New York in around 2006, and that's where I stayed until the city died.
And then what are some of your memories of Belgium that you have as a little
Um,
kid?
it was a great sort of magical time in a lot of ways. I had lots of friends from all over the world, or I guess maybe all over Western and Eastern Europe. There were Americans as well. I mean, I was going to, it was called Shape military base. And it was what's called a Dodds school. I think there was a NATO base somewhere nearby the school, actually, not far away. But, I had friends from like Turkey, from Greece, the Netherlands, France, the UK, in addition to the States. So I think I sort of got a very worldly experience from a very young age. So I think it served me well in a lot of ways later on in life, in terms of me being able to have a more broad perspective on things.
Did you live in the city or countryside in Belgium?
We lived on a base at first. It was Shape military base, and then we moved. Then we moved out to an apartment complex, which was off base and further away. I can't remember what the name of it was. Maybe you would kind of call it a suburb, but it was. We had to be bused to school, and I do remember one day. I think Snoop Dogg's album had just come out, and one of the kids on the bus had, I guess, he managed to convince the bus driver somehow, who English was not his first language, to play the song. So he just had these filthy rap lyrics talking about "ain't no fun if the homies can't have none" on the way to school. I think he kind of figured out what was going on, because we were all kind of giggling at all the bad words, and they ended up turning it off. But so that's one fun memory.
And did you eat lots of like chocolates and waffles? Is it a culinary delight or not really? It's just very
No, it was
overrated.
no, it was like it was regular food. There wasn't any. It was regular like school lunches and things like that. There weren't any. We didn't go out and have any sort of fine dining experiences. Not that I could remember anyway. Not on a military salary.
So how long did you when did you become interested in you want to do theater acting, right? You didn't do film, or did you do both?
Well, my I always say my life doesn't make sense. There's nobody in my family who, is an actor or who is in the arts, except for my younger brother, who began as an athlete, and then he sort of moseyed on over into making music. But for myself, I was really into illustration. So, cartooning. At one point, I thought I was going to, make like comic books, but I was also influenced by cartoons like Calvin and Hobbes and The Far Side, especially. I think both of those, The Far Side especially, probably shaped my sense of humor in a lot of ways. But I was going to draw. I was going to do illustration. I dabbled in band a little bit. I wrote a little poetry, some short fiction here and there. But there was no, I wasn't one of those kids who saw, Joseph in the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat when I was 6, and I decided I had to do musical theater the rest of my life. My life would have been easier if that had been the case. But no, there was a girl that I liked in my senior year of high school, and then I chased her. I dropped my third year French class, much to the chagrin of my teacher, who wanted me to go to the governor's school for French. And I just found, I just had this sort of latent aptitude for, I was like, writing sketches and stuff like that, but just sort of, I was always comfortable being in front of an audience. I mean, I've seen other people kind of break down and cry, in terms of being in front of an audience. And I just never had that problem. It was never an issue for me. And I took to it like a duck to water. And then I did my first musical in my senior year, and had some pretty standout moments. And then I did my first play in college, which was a very serious role. And up until then, I'd just been a class clown. And, I was, my life was sort of uprooted every 3 to 4 years. So I always had to find a way to ingratiate myself with the new kids. And I found I liked making people laugh, and I was good at it. And so I always thought that I was just, the funny guy. But then I had this dramatic role at like 17, and I found that I could actually act. And it was at a very vulnerable time in my life, I think, and I got a lot of encouragement, despite all you hear about the racism of the industry today. I was encouraged by many people very early on to continue, and that I would find success if I just applied myself and worked hard, and that's pretty much what happened.
Who are your favorite actors or directors or playwrights? Who are some of your icons that you've looked up to?
Well, I feel like you sort of, as a black, as an actor who is black, you sort of have to say Denzel. It was cliche at first, but the fact of the matter is that even in bad movies, Denzel Washington just is there's something about him that is so, even in stillness, that's so dynamic about him. There's always something going on behind his eyes. His, the trying to define what a good actor is. I mean, I think maybe good or bad isn't quite the right term, but convincing is maybe a better term. So, or believable. Denzel Washington ends up being convincing and believable in anything he does, and whether it's in a mediocre movie like John Q, there's an incredible scene where he is planning to commit suicide, so that he can donate his heart to his son, and it's so powerful. I think a lot of people, a lot of actors think that the ability to cry is good acting. It's not. You're just emoting. But what Denzel is doing in a scene like this is that he is pursuing this objective of, he's trying to, what's the term I'm looking for? He's trying to, he's kind of kissing his son goodbye in a way. And he's trying to he tells him to stay away from the bad things. He's not the most articulate. His character isn't the most articulate. And so you see this guy who's just trying to give well wishes to his son, but the circumstances are very, very emotional. So he has that emotion with him, but he's still in pursuit of a particular intention and objective, and it's so powerful. But even in non-showy roles, there's a great kind of underrated film called Courage Under Fire, which also features Meg Ryan, Matt Damon in one of his first roles, Lou Diamond Phillips in a really interesting role where it's not showy at all. He plays this lieutenant who is haunted by alcoholism and some other demons. And it's a film about trying to get to the bottom of whether or not this woman, who's like the first woman to be nominated for like a Medal of Honor for her service. And this is the '90s, by the way. So these kinds of stories were still going on, and they were much better told, I think, back in those days, and much more nuanced. But it's not showy. There's no big sort of it's not Training Day where he's kind of this madcap police officer, but basically, he's very transformational. To this day, whenever I see a picture of Malcolm X, I also see Denzel Washington. I mean, that's how much he transformed into that role. So he's one of my favorites. Another one I love is Tom Cruise. People sort of jump on me. They're like, why do you like Tom Cruise? But the fact is, he's actually a really good actor. He's got this great sort of kinetic intensity and energy in what he does. You see him in films like Collateral, where he's just kind of madcap, but he's able to focus it very well. If you look at movies like, what is it? The film with Jack Nicholson, the famous line, I can't believe I can't remember the name of it right now. You Can't Handle the Truth. What is it? But
A Few Good Men.
A Few Good Men. Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, he's convincing there as this like sort of young attorney with this great intensity. But there's this great scene where, and it's a great sort of film acting technique where he starts out in this courtroom. It's this climactic scene actually. And he has this great intensity, but then as the camera pushes in on his face, he ends up kind of whispering. And in real life, you're like, dude, no one can hear you in this fucking courtroom, dude. I'm sorry, I don't know if you can swear or not. But there's something about what he does that's so open and innocent, but also still has a quiet intensity about him. But he's actually just a really good actor, and he makes really good movies. He knows what his job is. It's always, he's putting himself on the line to entertain us, the paying moviegoers. Mm-hmm. Another actor I love is Jimmy Stewart from back in the day. I'm a big fan of It's a Wonderful Life, Vertigo, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. He's really great in all those. Before Marlon Brando kind of came along and everyone was talking about the quote unquote method, I think Jimmy Stewart, Rear Window is another one. Jimmy Stewart was giving very naturalistic performances before it became cool to do so. And, I love Cary Grant as well, like one of the old timers. He's just really, really incredibly funny. His timing is unbelievable. I mean, he was an acrobat and a circus performer before he became a movie star. And so you can see those kinds of skills in the work that he does, the comedic work that he does. But, I can go on. There's a few that I really enjoy.
If you had what would be your ideal project as a performer? If you could, what would it be? Do you have a passion project, a story, a movie, something you want to tell?
There's a couple that I have in mind. One is a musical I've wanted to do for a long time. It's called Oklahoma. It's an old Rodgers and Hammerstein musical, and people might think that it's dated by today's standards, but I think it's just a great feel-good story that I think would resonate with a lot of people. Another story is another one called Carousel by the same people, which is a much, much darker and heavier musical, which features a very toxic relationship at the center, and a character named Billy Bigelow, who, in addition to just having really, really great songs, he's really charismatic and charming, but also kind of abusive. But he has a sort of weird redemption arc, and it's a very difficult material to kind of pull off today. But I think the show has a lot to say about just who we are as humans and who we fall in love with, and how that can hurt us sometimes. There's also a couple of plays by the Black playwright August Wilson that I think would be really great for people to see, because the great thing about August is that he wrote, even though people would probably disagree with many of his socio-political views, the fact is he was writing these plays, even though it was primarily for a Black audience, they resonate with everyone, because he's writing about normal people in extraordinary circumstances trying to work their lives out. And I've seen these plays just really impact all kinds of people in person. So if there's a way that we can do these kinds of things and and share them with a broader audience that's outside of these deep blue metros. I think, we really, really have some. I think there's a huge thirst for this kind of work for people to see. Another one I have is this idea of I feel like the Reconstruction era in the U.S. is sort of overlooked in a lot of ways. It's like the Civil War and Emancipation, and then Jim Crow. We skip over this whole period where there was these great reforms happening, and these newly freed slaves are rebuilding their lives. You have these black senators, one in particular, which I think is really interesting. I think he was a South Carolinian senator, black man, who had this mysterious past, but but these people are working and trying to rebuild a nation. I think it's such a period that is fertile for dramatic exploration, and no one has really done it yet. So if I had millions of dollars and all the top talent, I would try to produce a work like that, because I think that would really it would be ambitious and bold and kind of epic, and it would really explore a period of history which I think a lot of people kind of gloss over in a weird way, even though it was such a hugely interesting and dynamic period in American history.
Did you see that new Elvis movie that came out?
No, I've heard not good things about it though. Did you see it?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting how there's just that era of history that he was in. So many things, so much drama, 50s, 60s, 70s, and then everything seems to be kind of slowing down with charisma in recent decades. And just looking back at that era where there was so much energy, good and bad, so much drama, there's a lot of charisma in American culture in that time period that has now become kind of sucked out of our nation, in terms of now, people are pining for Pizza Hut from the 90s, which is kind of sad if that's what your hallmark of memory is.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting that what you're touching on there. And a lot of my conversations online on my podcast have been, a lot of people, we're sort of converging on this point where things were going pretty okay until around 2010 or so. And there was a lot that was going on, and then things just kind of fell off a cliff. And I know from my perspective in the performing arts, I mean, so I went to one of these fancy conservatories, and one of the cool things about it is that you could audition, you could watch, once you got into the program, you could watch other prospective students auditioning to get in. You could sit in on their auditions and watch. And I would listen to the faculty, many of whom had been there, in their positions for a couple of decades. So they'd seen all kinds of great talent. Some of your favorite stars, roll through that particular program. And all of them would say that, increasingly it's becoming more and more difficult to find, like, people are nice. They're generally nice. They're nice people. They're bright and shiny, and they're friendly. But there's very little that's interesting about them. There's very little depth about them, very little, as you say, charisma about them. And they're finding it more and more difficult to find people who are willing to find artists, quote unquote, who are willing to go to the sort of darker, more uncomfortable, emotional places that you need to go to in order to be a more well-rounded artist. They seem to be afraid to expand and take up space, just literally take up space, either with their physical body or their emotional intensity, or or even just their vocal presence. I mean, when you're speaking or singing, you're literally producing sound waves that impact your audience. And even guys with big voices like mine, I mean, I had to learn, and interestingly, a lot of women had to learn how to, take up more space, which, you can kind of expect. But even like a lot of the guys, especially I think in our culture, there is a softness that has to kind of be, that I think forms a barrier for a lot of people to get past, because we're all so focused on being polite and inoffensive to people. And really, it's just freaking boring to watch. And so you see all these kind of stale, okay performers and shows, and you see all the money in front of you, be it special effects, or if you're watching a play or a musical, great costumes, incredible lighting, all these kind of fancy screens or technology or whatever, but you're not really moved by what you're seeing.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is a byproduct of the sort of things being written today. You have political correctness, which really kind of shrinks what people can talk about. I mean, I think one of the reasons that these plays from, the ancient Greeks and from Shakespeare, one of the reasons they endure is because they were able to tell the truth about who we are as people in a lot of ways that we maybe that we're not allowed to do today.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why. I mean, this is a podcast we're doing now, but my primary medium of communication has been radio, and I picked it on purpose because of its theatrical origin. It's got kind of a carnival Americana energy to it when it's done right, and I think that there's this. It's very popular now to pretend to not be enthusiastic about what you're doing. To be so ironic
Right.
and so cynical and so above it all, and just completely devoid. It's like it's very passé to be really excited or passionate about something. It's like, what are you? It's almost considered low class now to be passionate.
I got to comment on that. There's a great book called The Intent to Live by a man named Larry Moss, and he has an entire chapter. I think it's called "Don't Be Cool." Like, don't worry about being cool. Cool is like, we're gonna slouch instead of hold ourselves up, high. We're not going to be very expressive. If we reveal any kind of parts of ourselves, then we're gonna be seen as weird, or we're gonna be mocked or made fun of. So everyone tries to be kind of like, everything's either, we have to be completely positive all the time, which nobody is because we're not robots. Life is hard. Or it's like we can't, there's only a limited range of emotions we're allowed to express. I think on top of all of that, which is cyanide to any performer. But on top of all of that, there is and I've mentioned this before as well, there is a broad sort of deep-seated cynicism and nihilism about a lot of our culture now. Whether you're talking about, the world's going to end in 12 years because of climate, so there's really no point in in investing in anything, or the economy is effed, so and I can't save up, or everything is sexist, everything is racist, everything is broken, the system needs to be changed and torn down. There's all this obsession with deconstructing and tearing things down, and this idea that we essentially have no future. So people have no hope, they have nothing to aspire to, and they're not inspired by anything either. So it's a very kind of drab, wan, just really sort of negative outlook on life, which I don't think really produces work that people are really interested in. And so I wonder if, in response to the previous decade, I mentioned 2010 as this sort of jumping off point where things began to really go down the crapper. If the next decade, perhaps more artists can step forward and say, no, this is, art is an extension of our humanity, the best and the worst of it, in really vivid and expressive ways. And I think it can even serve a spiritual function for those who aren't, or who are non-believers like myself. Maybe if artists can pull their heads out of their collective behinds and get rid of this sort of deconstructionist, postmodern kind of nonsense, they can get back to really, really exploring the highs and the lows of, and the richness of life and humanity in a really engaging way, to really get more people on board, especially in the United States, which even though it has its moments artistically, and in terms of performance, Hollywood and musical theater, I think, is two of our biggest exports to the rest of the world. But when you talk about countries like Britain, for instance, their theater culture is just so much more advanced and entrenched than ours is. And I think that we in the States, there was a time where it was more mainstream, and I wonder if it can be that way again. But again, even our movies, a lot of it is just, even the Marvel stuff. I love the Marvel stuff, but a lot of it is stories that were adapted from stories that were adapted from stories that are already decades old. So we're kind of, you mentioned the 90s, going back to the 90s, and I think people are looking back, but not looking ahead, and there's a real longing for what was, and I think there's part of the reason is that things now seem so kind of bleak and again, I say that the word drab.
Yeah. It seems that if you could produce a really good show, maybe get Rob Schneider or someone to get involved with, that might be more important for culture than any midterm election. If you can get a good show that really, because the conservatives, people who are non-leftists, they have a very difficult time seemingly making good art, just good art. Every time conservatives get to make a movie, they end up making a documentary that's a political thesis and stuff, and it's just we don't want that. I want to see good art that really challenges the really gets us to wrestle with questions that we're afraid to wrestle with. That's what I want. I think the whole world is begging for that in America again.
I think so as well. And one of my beefs with I guess I'll call them collectively the right, just to be in very broad strokes. I realize that I'm speaking very broadly and generalizing, but my beef is that, and again, I think part of it is born out of a certain kind of pragmatism. A career in the arts is very unstable. It's hard to raise a family. You move around a lot. It's hell on relationships. People who are artists, especially if they're brilliant, they tend to be kind of dark and stormy and really difficult to get along with. At the same time, I also understand that there's a lot of hostility even for moderates and independents in the arts world, which is really unfortunate. At the same time, you can't just say, focus solely on, say, economics or, foreign policy and stuff like that, which is important, but then complain that the quote unquote libs have taken over all the arts. You got to get in there and you got to help us create. And there are conservative or, libertarian leaning or, more independent minded artists in the field. But the thing is, they keep their mouths shut because they don't want to get graylisted or blacklisted. And to me, it's just insane that you have people who are supposedly free thinking and who are supposedly all about freedom of expression. They should be about freedom of expression. We're artists, for God's sakes, who will, especially after Trump was elected, who would just completely go off the deep end if someone says anything critical about, climate alarmism or feminism or trans or anything. It's like, dude, we're here, and it's part of the problem is people don't speak up enough and just have uncomfortable confrontations and conflicts. And if it's all in service of creating a great work of art, then I've literally had professionals say like, yeah, this person and I clashed a lot, but I would collaborate with them again because what we produced was amazing. Warren Beatty was once quoted as saying that if everyone's having a good time, it ain't going to be any good. And it's not to say that, you need to be abusive or whatever, but, a lot of, what's the term? Diamonds are forged in a lot of pressure. It's just, you need to have a lot of friction it's good to have healthy friction and tension to work things out because you're collaborating with lots and lots of people to bring any sort of play or movie. If you stayed around for the credits, you see just the vast numbers of people it takes to make a movie or a big budget movie. So I think one of my beefs is that people kind of sit back and they say, well, all the artists are weirdos, which is true, we are, but you got to get in the game as well and create as well. And the good thing is there's two good things about that. One, people are jumping into the game now and they are producing work. And I found that there is a huge, like you were saying, a huge demand now for just great work that speaks to people who have the audacity to live outside of deep blue metros. And I've gotten such great responses. One of my most watched videos, two of my most watched videos. One is with Douglas Murray, who's often called upon, a conservative author and writer, often called upon to comment on political issues. But, we sat there and talked about art for almost an hour and a half, and people loved it. Victor Davis Hansen is another one, a classicist and a scholar who is often, again, he's a brilliant mind when it comes to political matters. But we talked about the importance of Greek tragedy and Greek literature. And people really love that as well. And posted some Shakespeare sonnets. There's some yard work going on. I hope you can't hear it. I hope it's not distracting.
Oh, it's okay.
But people love that as well. And so to me, there is, like you're saying, there is a hunger now for just great work that speaks to just the sort of universality of the human experience, and speaks to who we are. And and it's not that politics can be completely divorced. I mean, I think they can inform the work, but if the politics overwhelm the story craft, then that's when you begin to have an issue.
Right. Yeah, I think I'm a big fan of Rene Girard. That's where we get the name of this show called Things Hidden. It comes from his famous book, Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World. He has some interesting ideas into anthropology and art and so forth. He was a professor at Stanford. It passed away about was that 7 years ago now. And but he had this theory of mimetic theory called mimetic theory. And he talked about how great art seems to exhibit a similar pattern of human drama and relationship in which people are fighting over the same objects of desire, whether it be a girl or status, and eventually they fight so much that they forget what they were fighting for, and they're just obsessed with one-upping one another. I think he says that a lot of the great works of literature were inspired by the Gospels and the Bible being so permeating into cultures when those great works were being developed, like Shakespeare and so forth. And you have to wonder, maybe one of the reasons why we're losing so much good art and good storytelling is because we're trying to get past the Bible, the biblical influence of our culture. Whether you like it or not, it seems to be the energy behind a lot of the great storytelling masterworks and themes. I mean, when you're a kid in school, they teach you about the Christ figure in every great story. You know what I mean? It's like it's been such a heavy impact on art that once you go past Christianity as the dominant story that kind of haunts the society, if you go past that, you end up in nihilism where things don't have any meaning, and now we're just fighting over power, which doesn't make for good story because it's not true.
Well, it's fascinating. One, it goes back to this idea that, and I began to realize this the more that I would do like period plays, old plays, and like do research around them, which is that, you can have all this sort of technological changes and shifts, cultural changes and shifts, but ultimately what motivates people has remained unchanged for thousands and thousands of years. And so it kind of goes back to that comment about like, so many great dramas surrounding these sort of central common themes. Another thing, and again, I'm someone who's an atheist, but at the same time, within the past couple of years especially, I've come to the realization that we have all this great technology. We think of ourselves as following the science. We're so rational, but that's not enough. There's a deeper realm. There's another sort of level, or maybe another plane, energetically, maybe it's spiritual, that I think we can tap into via art. And like you were saying, you read Shakespeare. It's littered with not just like obscure Greek references, but also a lot of biblical references. I mean, I played Macduff in a production of Macbeth in San Francisco, and what I noticed when I read through the text is that Macduff, I said, well, first of all, let me start as that Macduff is going to be a counterpoint to whatever Macbeth is. So Macbeth, you see him consorting with witches and, dark magic throughout the play. But then you read Macduff's lines and his wife's lines as well before she's savagely killed. And after her one scene, they reference God and angels a lot, and the Macbeths do not. And I said, this is a man who is patriotic, and he's God-fearing. He believes in God. And, it's so fascinating when you go through a lot of Shakespeare's works. There is that influence that's there. And so even though I'm somebody who says, maybe organized religion isn't for me, I do realize that it also serves a purpose and a function. And I also think that there has to be some reason that these stories in the Bible, that this book, the good book, has stuck around for all this time and has resonated with so many people. And, perhaps at some point I'll study this more in depth, but I do find it fascinating. Even if you read these Greek plays, they're always talking about the gods this, the gods that. There's this idea, this connection to this divine force and spirit that's like sort of guiding our lives, this supernatural force, if you will. And I don't know. I mean, I think it's fascinating. I don't have any strong opinions on whether or not us getting too far removed from the Bible and Christianity has had an impact, a strictly negative impact. But at the same time, I also wonder if maybe we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I mean, I'm totally open to that perspective now in a way that I wasn't maybe 10 or even 2 years ago, as I said before.
What opened you up was seeing what happened with the pandemic to this, or something else?
When I saw the way that people were so ready, so eager to throw away everything that makes being alive worthwhile, and especially with regard to how we've treated children throughout all of this. And it's funny because of my views, I'm viewed as selfish, but I'm like, I'm an atheist, but I was offended when they closed churches. People find community there. They find connection there. They find joy and happiness there. I'm childless, but I've been a very vocal advocate about keeping schools open and not putting masks on kids, and now, not forcing children to take these injections, which they overwhelmingly don't need. And so the point is that I began to say something is deeply, deeply wrong, and something is missing in all these people, where they can just completely divorce themselves and be completely comfortable with divorcing themselves from life and from living. I don't understand why it's enough for people, and especially in the arts. That was the big thing for me in New York City, to have all these, I'll use the term artists loosely at this point. That's how angry I am about this. But to have all these people in New York City, the city formerly known as New York, and one of the cultural centers of the universe, allow themselves to be rendered non-essential by buffoons like Bill de Blasio and scumbags like Andrew Cuomo. I said, there's just, what is really important to us here, and what is really going on. And so terms like good and evil began to creep into my vocabulary in a way that they hadn't before. And just this, I just began to see like there's something missing in all these people who are completely okay with obscuring part of your face, which obscures human connection, the ability to communicate and to read other people, especially on children when they're just in these, I spent the first year of my conservatory training being really envious of children, because in so many ways they're so perfect for what it is that I do. They're relentlessly imaginative. They're so engaged in their bodies. They love play. They're curious. They're open about so many things. They absorb information like a sponge. Why would you try to stifle that? And for 2 years straight. And so for me, I began to say, there's some kind of void in a lot of these people, and I don't know what it is. Maybe it's God, maybe it's religion, but there's something that's missing, that these people can be so disconnected from I keep repeating myself, but just the richness and the vitality of just being alive and connecting with people and having conversations and relationships. This is the food that we live on. And once I began to observe all of these things, and in the way that, these measures would be imposed by this sort of, I call them a pseudo clergy of this small cluster of powerful people, who, regardless of any consequences, just said, we're going to go full steam ahead. And to see people just keep going along with it, no matter how deleterious or destructive these policies are in the long term, I said, there's something really wrong here. There's something really missing. There's something that's empty. And so that's when I began to say, well, maybe if we're moving toward a more secular society, and I do acknowledge that there are people that are taking what's called the God pill. There are a lot of people who are saying they're finding religion, who were formerly atheists, which I think is interesting. But I do wonder if we're going in that direction, regardless of whether or not people find the God pill. Art And the arts can be a place where people from all walks of life can gather and have some kind of spiritual experience. When you're in a dark room with people and you're watching King Lear or you're watching Infinity War or something, that there's that can transcend all of the sort of societal ills and all the problems and the economy and wars and crime or whatever. Just to have people in a room together having a communal experience with it could be music, it can be singing, whatever. There's something of value there, and I do wonder, kind of piggybacking off of your question, if the move toward a more secular society is linked to this loss and this appreciation of the arts in our country. But the short answer is that definitely that how things unfolded during the pandemic really changed my mind about a lot of things. And I said there's something really, really wrong here.
Yes, return of people's experience with the sacred. I think that a cult is simply that which is a group of people devoted to a kind of binding cause that has been rejected by the dominant culture of our setting, wherever we're at, which means that when you see the dominant culture start to act like a cult, you're just seeing that the paradigm that we've always been swimming in is starting to be revealed to those. So basically what I'm saying is the status paradigm with culture has always been cult-like. When it's working well, you don't see it as cult-like. When it starts to fray at the edges and it starts to become so insane and it loses the plot or it jumps the shark or whatever else, since we're doing theater today, whatever metaphor we want to use, when it's doing that, then you can see the cultic structure of cultures. That's where we get the word culture anyways. I see religion, culture, and cults as basically kind of synonyms and just different. Like a religion is that which you say, well, that's a cult that made it big, so we can't really call it a cult. A cult is something that is small and antisocial from the dominant cultural system. So it's like, well, we don't accept that as like the way they do things, where they all band glasses and they all wear red hats, or they all wear, whatever. We say that's different. It's not accepted by the mainstream. Therefore, we call it a cult. But really, cultic structures are underpinning even dominant culture, like what we have today. You just can't see it until it starts to fray and fall apart. And when they start doubling down on antisocial behavior, then you start to say, oh my goodness, wow, this has always been basically the way humans function. We just convinced ourselves that we had transcended religion. We really didn't. I mean, when you look at the word religion in the Latin, it means to bind together. So that which binds us together, the force that binds us together, is the religion, the culture of a people, right? And the question, I think that, you look at the ancient, you were talking about the Greeks had charisma because they had a binding agent of religion that kind of gave them a sense of who they are and where they were going as a people and how the universe was structured. And I think Christianity was that binding agent for America as the dominant cultural story from which we could get Star Wars and Lion King and all these great things. And now that we've said, well, we've had enough of that, the culture we're going to now is a very vicious, totalitarian, bleak, like you were saying, postmodern, where there's no meaning. It's all babbling. One metaphor you could use is the Tower of Babel. Modernity was mankind's attempt at creating a unified, a tower that we could become God. And along the way, that project got cursed. And now we're, cursed. And in the story of the Tower of Babel, they all start babbling to one another and they can't get the tower completed. So it's a total disaster and they're scattered. And I think that's what we're seeing now with postmodernity, where we can't agree on who the villains are. We can't agree on who the victims are. We can't agree on meaning. We can't agree on what gender is. I saw that your pronouns are she or her. I hope I haven't violated your pronoun. We can't agree on anything to have meaning. And if you don't have meaning, how can you tell a story together? You're just constantly babbling at one another, Hey, how you doing, sir? Excuse me, you mispronounced me, misgendered me. I can't continue this play with you, sir. Okay, well, you misgendered me. I don't like the word sir. So you just get into this constant, babbling at one another. And then when you add in the racial critical theory stuff where it's about, institutional whiteness is showing up on time for work. Isaac Newton is institutional white supremacy because he came up with the theory. Now you're getting into babbling. You can't even get into talks. How can you make a movie about gravity if gravity is now white supremacy? So everything becomes nothing. It's just meaningless power plays. And I think what you're talking about of putting art that actually has meaning is one of the most subversive things you could do in a world in which we are told there is no meaning but power and violence.
Well, yeah, I mean, the key word that jumps out at me is the word meaning. There's a crisis of meaning. And, I've always taken umbrage with people who say like, oh, if you're an atheist, that means that nothing means anything. And I did have that mindset for a bit, but I think that what that means is that it's actually incumbent upon you to assign yourself some kind of a meaning. And what I found, which is really funny, is that the Christians in my life over the past 2 years have exhibited more faith and courage and have been more uplifting than the neurotic secularists who always think the sky is falling. And there's something that there's something bigger that unites them. And I've always said, whatever is bigger than yourself. I mean, it doesn't have to be God. It could be devotion to the upkeep of your society. But whatever gives you some sort of purpose. And I mean, I'm struggling with this right now. I mean, I don't know what my future is supposed to be now because I can't work as an actor anymore, or at least for the present. But and it's really intensely destabilizing and demoralizing when you don't have a reason to get up in the morning. I think a lot of people, Matthias Desmet, who popularized the term mass formation, he's doing the interview circuit for his new book. And a lot of his interviews, he talks about how we have this sort of crisis of meaning. People don't have any sort of direction. We're so atomized from each other. And this kind of goes back into it. Even back in the mid-aughts when I was in conservatory, I had teachers who would say, we're the more and more, and it was a voice and speech teacher, but she said the more and more that we become digitized in our communication, the less connected we become, and the less able we are to embody this, this huge Shakespearean or Greek language. I mean, one of our assignments was to do a Greek messenger speech. These plays, late in the play, you have this one guy that comes in and has this 2 or 3 page monologue talking about these events that have happened off stage. And you need to be really, really strong and dynamic and skilled as an actor to be able to make that sing and make that live, and make that exciting for an audience for the 2, 3, 5 minutes that you're speaking. And it's hard to do that when you're so used to being stuck in your phone and you're sort of hunched down, your energy is all downward and not upward and out, which is a very vulnerable place to be. We're not very vulnerable people anymore. We try to close things off now, for good reasons. Obviously, we have to protect ourselves sometimes, but there's also just a cutting off. Again, this idea of disconnect and disconnection, and division. And
I saw that recently. I was covering some local speeches that have happened in my area here in Florida as a media person. And Donald Trump was one of the speakers. Ron Paul was speaking. And you look at them, and these people will get in line hours early, hours and hours. They'll wait for their speaker, right? And then they're in such enraptured applause when they come out. And 5 minutes into the speech, they're glued back to their phone, and they're looking at their phone their entire time. And you're like, wait a second, you just spent your whole day waiting to see this person, and you're in a state of ecstasy. Why are you now falling apart into your phone, your digital world? Why are you losing all that energy and going back into that? And I think it's because we become a celebrity culture without any transcendence, something that really makes you, in the moment, staying present in the moment, staying connected with another, right?
Well, I talk about transcendence a lot as well. There's the British conservative, the late Roger Scruton. He has this great mini documentary called "Why Beauty Matters," and one of the themes of that film is about this. How art can kind of pull you out of yourself and give you an experience beyond, mostly beyond the ability of human beings to really articulate it, but that there's just something, there. And I just think the more that we're connected to these technologies, I mean, even though we're connecting via technology right now, that just the more that we're sucked into these rabbit holes and we're pulled apart from each other. And, that makes it, I mean, we need each other. We all got to live here. And, again, the richness and beauty of life and living is, I hate to use the word sacred, but I mean, it's just, that's kind of what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, maybe it's just a crisis of meaning, just to go back to that phrase that we just don't, we have nothing to really fight for. So like you were saying, we tend to babble on about things that ultimately down the line, I mean, they matter intensely to the people that are babbling about them, but in the grand scheme of things, it's like, all right,
like body positivity for the the characters, the M&M characters.
I mean, it's shocking to me that racism was not ended by taking Aunt Jemima off of the syrup bottle.
Right.
It's how on earth, it's amazing that Lightyear didn't, the new Buzz Lightyear movie didn't do gangbusters at the box office. It's it's the worst thing ever, but hey, we have this lesbian kiss in there. It's like, well, people don't care about that. They care about things that actually, I mean, love is one thing. You could write about love and you could have a story where people love each other. I mean, there was an interesting movie that came out, I think it was maybe around 2009, 10 or so, called Gun Hill Road. Mm-hmm. And it was about this like 16-year-old boy who was transitioning into a girl. And it was really a coming of age story. And, he's trying to navigate these she's trying to navigate these relationships and these awkward moments, and, how her friends and family are responding. And there's moments of lightheartedness and humor, but also, great pathos. And it's like, that, even though it's about a more niche topic, it's still dealing with these universal themes of like, I'm watching this awkward kind of sex scene, and it's not graphic at all, but I'm like, yeah, you have these two kids who are for whatever reason attracted to each other, and they're trying to work it out, and it's really weird. And it's extra weird for obvious reasons, but to see these two characters kind of bounce off each other and try to work through it, it's like, yeah, even though we haven't all experienced that in quite the same way, I mean, we still have that kind of experience of like first love and first kisses and all, so there's a universality, I guess, is what I'm getting at, that we seem to, the more atomized we become, the more disconnected we become, the more we forget about that. And I think that's one of the big tragedies of our times right now. And that's probably one of the reasons why so much of the COVID nonsense was so effective, because people are just so disconnected from life and living.
Right. Well, you said you've been banned from being able to do your acting because, I guess, not taking the COVID. Is that the cause, the reason?
Yeah. Currently, you cannot work, to my knowledge. First of all, you have to be in the unions if you want to get any kind of reasonable wages and make a living or a career. Whether that's SAG-AFTRA, the Screen Actors Guild, or Actors Equity, which is the theater, Stage Actors Guild. So early on, they began to really push for a fully vaccinated company, and with no sort of acknowledgement that people might not want to take such a new product. And initially I fled from New York to Georgia to kind of wait until things had blown over, but then they began mandating these things, and now they're mandating boosters. And what's particularly disgusting about it is that as an actor, unless you're super duper famous, you really don't have any leverage. You're really replaceable. So, there's, life will basically churn on, the business will churn on without me. There's going to be 100 guys who would willingly take my spot, if I turn down a show or multiple roles or whatever. And the people who are imposing these policies have to know this, that actors have no real leverage. And part of the issue is that, unemployment is the rule and not the exception. So there's even more pressure. You might, I mean, even just beyond needing, to pay your rent and keep the lights on and feed yourself. I mean, that's how you get health insurance, is by working. So there's all kinds of factors that they kind of dangle in front of you, that they take away by removing your ability to work. You can't even audition. That's the crazy thing to me, that even just to be eligible to audition now, you have to be vaxxed and boosted. And I've said from the beginning, not from the beginning, but almost from the beginning, like, guys, you'll never be fully vaccinated. I mean, they keep saying, get your booster. And are you really trying to tell me that you want to exist in an industry where you're not only discriminating against people, and you're happy to do so, to be this sort of new kind of faux aristocracy, but you're okay with being forced to take a medical product over and over and over again just to be eligible to have a job interview for a job you statistically probably will not get. That if you do get the job, it might last 8 weeks, or if it's an open-ended Broadway run, it can close tomorrow. There's no certainty. Or if it's a film project, you shoot for maybe 3 months or whatever. I mean, it's one thing if you're part of a company, you've been there for a long time, and maybe you're in healthcare. I mean, I don't like those mandates either, but I mean, I don't know. It's just, there's so many reasons why it just doesn't work outside of efficacy, and it doesn't, how they don't stop transmission. But basically, yeah, if you don't take the shots, you can't work. And so a lot of actors are also lying about their status. And I'm not going to do that either. I think if you do that, then you're continuing to uphold a really unethical and bad policy. So I'm kind of stuck. I went from working with stars and really being on my way, being one job away, as they say, from really hitting the big time, to now I'm waiting tables with a bunch of stupid 20-year-olds. So it's very frustrating, and I'm looking at it from afar, and they can't see it because they're, I referenced Matthias Desmet before. I mean, this idea of mass formation, which I really think caught on because it finally provided a framework for people to really understand what they were seeing. And these people, I mean, you mentioned cult as well. I mean, these people, they're in a cult, and they can't see anything else. And I also suspect that a lot of people agree with me. They tell me privately, but they don't say anything publicly, and that's part of the problem as well. So there's a lack of courage there, and integrity. It's a huge issue. But then the thing is, if I were to be allowed back in tomorrow, I mean, I think of this James Baldwin quote, which I'm going to bastardize, but it's like, why would I want to integrate into a house that's on fire? And why would I want to be alongside people who decided that I should not be entitled to medical treatment, or to be able to go inside of a museum or a bar or a gym, or to even fly or travel in some cases, because I didn't take this medical product, even though I already recovered from the disease. So, it's totally screwed up. And a lot of people are being destroyed by this.
John Gardner said art begins in a womb, but I don't think he meant myocarditis, literally. So.
Yeah, there was a story that came out just really quickly of a British actor who was 31 years old. It was on Deadline, one of the Hollywood trades, where he was 31, and the article says, like in the second paragraph, second sentence, it's like, he had some heart issues before, but they cropped up mysteriously again recently, and you can't say exactly what it is. They're not releasing what the cause of death is, but there's no way you can work unless you've gotten those shots. And we know what the side effect profile is of these shots. And it's just like, I wonder how many of these stories are happening and people just aren't talking about it, or it's being covered up. I think people know about this and they're just not saying anything. And again, the lack of whatever, the soul, the spirit, this void that people just, they let this kind of thing continue. They don't say anything about it. And it's really kind of disturbing to watch.
So where you're at now, visualize for us, where do you want to be in 5 years at this crossroads that you're at?
You know, it's really tough. I would say I would like to be producing my own work. If I could just chill and just read books and research and podcasts, and then do like concerts, and then maybe a play every once in a while that people can see. Maybe some movies here and there. That would be cool. You know, some writing as well. But I'm still figuring out, what that's going to be now. What my 5 years is going to be now. That's kind of been the journey of my last couple of years now, and I think part of it is it's kind of scary because in a way I'm kind of more free now than I was before. I got booted out of the industry, purged, if you will. So now I'm going off of intellect and guts and instinct, and running, and I keep running my mouth. And the interesting thing about that is that the more that I do that, the more I wind up in strange circumstances, like, talking to a bunch of economics students at the Mises Institute.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of opportunities in this time of creative destruction, and there's great opportunities for a new era of entertainment and art and everything. So I wish you the best, and I want people to check out your podcast, the Clifton Duncan podcast. It's on YouTube. Search for Clifton Duncan. Also follow him at Clifton A. Duncan on Twitter. Keep up with what you're doing there. Thanks again for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, David. It's been a pleasure.
Very good. Take care.